now let me hand you over to Archie, Marais, and Hugo from Synthesis. Guys, bring it up to it.
So we're going to start off and just give you a brief intro around why we're sitting here and what we should be talking about this. So maybe we just start with you, Marais.
Yeah, so I got involved with the large language models and I had to look this up between 2 years ago. That's when the GPT beta was launched and I got access to it right then, one of the first people. Since then, I had a bit of a love-hate relationships with the LLMs. But in the meantime, we've built some real production systems using OpenAI. And so we'll talk a bit about that experience and, what we think is coming. Hugo was on the same project as myself.
Yeah, so I discovered the transformer architecture back in 2018, the year after it was published in the seminal paper. Attention was all immediately fell in love with technology, being a language bird, it gained an excuse to do cool stuff. It's good to see that the world is waking up now to see what exactly can be done with this thing, not just be afraid of the top world there on letters. But we're really glad that the world has reached this place where my absolute obsession is appreciated in some way. And then the last year, Archie and I sort of worked on integrating NLP techniques with client engagement channels, anything from contact center, applying analytics on the conversations that occur in these contact centers, as well as chatbots, assistants that can have certain things.
The reason why we actually started working together is my background is actually at software engineering, at data engineering, and machine learning engineering, right? And trying to get things into production really straight. So you get the hype. You get with people who are super excited about all of these new technologies out there. And then I'm often the one that has to break everyone's trouble at, making it reality and actually try and put it into production. And that's actually how Hugo and I started working together, because we're actually working with this exact space. So that's kind of where most of my experience and that learn that currently sits. But yeah, I think this is the topic today. If we could maybe just share some of our practical experiences to start with.
Yeah, so fine-tuning of the language models wasn't available on AI from the start. So we had to start with prompt engineering, but it only takes you that far. And then once that opened up, fine-tuning of models, that was really a game changer. And I believe it's very important to do the fine-tuning of the models on that particular task you want to solve. It really just elevates the performance of the model. And we're doing that. Now, the problem was 2 years ago, I thought, this is all confined to the large companies, the companies with the money, because it's so expensive to train the models. And really, luckily for us, in the last few months, things have become very democratized. And I think we'll chat a bit about that and how it's coming about. But, there was that lead memo from Google, we have in a moat. It's really a good read, and I think there's a lot of great insight into the current state of LLMs and also where it's going. But, you can use that as a basis to start thinking about how you can use this.
Absolutely. And, I think it's a great move in the right direction that these models and the research behind these models have been slightly more democratized in the last couple of weeks and months. There's still the issue, though, that the data itself is not democratized. The models that we have access to, most people have access to, like the internet, and they can use the OpenAI's API. But in some of the testing that I've done, in the way these large language models are trained, they have a tokenizer that constitutes what their vocabulary is. Because they only really encounter English and sort of more Western languages, that vocabulary is catered towards Western languages. Meaning, if you want to use these large language models on a less represented language, you pay about double for their services for like less than half of the performance. So yes, you have access to the model, but not in the meaningful way that Western companies or countries have access to these models. And I think to that extent, us as data specialists have an obligation or responsibility to force the research community to move towards a direction where the data itself is democratized as well. Because we know, and I can't blame any one company for this, but It's been mentioned multiple times today as well. When you get a good data set, it's hard to let go of that and put it out into the world. But we're at a place now that if we continue not doing that, the gap is going to widen, and the performance on less represented language is going to deteriorate over time. Now, how does a language die? People stop using it. And that's exactly how it's going to happen. These AI models are going to get worse and worse if we don't intentionally start working to release some of these data sets.
And I think that's the spirit of open sourcing as well, right? Let's take a step back from AI and just look at software in general. Why did we start open sourcing software? For this exact reason. So why is it now that when we're thinking about AI, we're not thinking of it from that context? Data is, you can kind of contain it within that same context as well. We do need to start democratizing data along with the models itself. And I think I could relate a lot to it, to Deshni's presentation as well, because a lot of the pointers that are mentioned, contextualizing your actual system, making sure you're building for the environment that you need to build for, and then also incorporating an ethical component behind it. But also, when you are actually building out these systems, everyone has a responsibility, from the data specialist to the person who is actually utilizing this at the end of the day. Everyone has an equal set of responsibilities. But also, it's also equally as important to ask the right questions, right? Because, Hugo just mentioned now democratizing data, making sure that it's available. There's more than one option to actually democratize data, right? It's not necessary to centralize data in one single entity where protection isn't actually at the state that you want it to be. There's other techniques, but you just need to ask the correct questions. So I think that's kind of also what one of the pointers that I'd like to leave today is we are in the world where AI is really getting to a point, and LLMs, ChatGPT, all of these things have proven it till date. We need to start asking the right questions and make sure that we aren't just ignoring the uncomfortable discussions at this point.
Should we get practical? How do you use LLMs in your daily workflows? If you do, how do you do that? What do you do? There's some tips.
I have to admit that I have a substantial amount of pride, and I don't really want to use it, but I often find myself in the place where I sort of catch myself out where I know it's going to be a good thing to just self-reflect using something like ChatGPT. I know I have a good idea, but if I don't have someone with me, I still think having a human to bounce ideas off of, that's better. But if you don't have someone readily available, it's just a great idea to sort of translate your ideas back to you.
Just rubber ducking.
Exactly.
With ChatGPT.
Have it be your alter ego to throw rocks at your ideas. Be it code, be it a business strategy, whatever the case may be. See if there might be a different perspective to what you're trying to do. And I found that that's really helpful.
But still being responsible about it, right? Because, remember the whole leak situation, so we still need to be careful with how you use it. So use it as an assistant, but also remember that this is going out into the world as well. So be careful what you put out there.
So do you use it in your daily workflows?
But very, very, very carefully.
Okay, nice. I must admit, I'm not like Hugo. I use Codex to code. I'll use GPT to, bounce a few ideas off it. And I even attempted to use AutoGPT, to prepare some material. And it was a big failure. So hence my love-hate relationship with LLMs. There's this promise that, or this idea that, it can do anything. And I've always wanted, like a minion or someone I can give tasks to, that gets performed done. And it's not yet living up to that hype, I think. AutoGPT obviously still very new, and maybe it'll get a bit better, but it's not there yet where it's production ready for a lot of things that we want, autonomous agents to be doing. So, but yes, incorporating, and I think, incorporating it into your workflow, there's a lot of people saying, your job will probably be taken over by someone that uses AI to augment themselves, not by computers, but someone. I don't know what you think about that.
I think it's for me personally, we've been doing that all along, right? All of a sudden we're getting so afraid of using ChatGPT to augment the way in which we're working. We're Googling every day. That's still augmentation of our skills to some degree. I think now the reason why there's so much fear about it is because this is AI and, this may take over the world. If it's used correctly, it probably won't take over the world. You just need to use it in the correct way.
The only real way to use it truly incorrectly is to not use it at all, right? And I think, prohibition has never worked for anything ever. So, some of the people here who might have small children, if you don't make them aware of the presence of AI in their lives, it's going to be a detriment to them. You're not going to protect them from anything. People are using these. I mean, in my free time, I like to think about how AI might impact society as a whole. And it's not difficult to imagine that third grade teachers are maybe using ChatGPT to put together a curriculum for their children. What might that look like if you propagate that over 10 or 20 or 50 years or whatever? You might be forgiven to think that some bias might be propagated in how these children are educated. And I think to that extent, it's quite important that we start enforcing or forcing a public forum that we discuss these things. What do we think? How do we think it should be used? And I think in that regard, sadly, South Africa is lagging behind, as we have, as of now, Stanford recently released a State of AI report where they stated there that they've analyzed a couple of countries, but South Africa has not yet released a single piece of legislature that mentions AI. We have no set of standards that regulate how AI should be used and could be used. Whereas,
don't you think it's also true, like in AI in general, for South African specific? If you think about it, languages per se. I mean, we did this research in terms of South African specific large language models that are out there. Like, I mean, you've done the research, so you know the exact numbers, but there's still a gap in terms of that as well. So the regulatory wise, as well as from an AI perspective as well, we are quite behind in general.
Exactly. And to some extent, you might say that maybe that allows freedom, but only to the point where large organizations want to adopt as well, where they're heavily regulated. So they can't adopt these technologies because the practitioners don't know what the best best practice is when they implement these tech.
What are some of the limitations you hit when you were doing your initial implementation 2 years ago?
Context length. Context length was a big thing for the type of task we were trying to solve. And you want to achieve an overall goal that is much bigger than what this model can accommodate. And so you had to figure out a way of breaking up the problem into smaller pieces and solve it bit by bit. And I see that we are probably not yet overcoming that problem, but the newer models, much larger context lengths, 8,000, 16,000 tokens. And I think the company that creates Claude has just announced that they have a new model with 100,000 token context length, which is quite nice and quite big. So I think new use cases and opportunities will be opened up with these new large context models.
So what do you think those opportunities could be, though? Because now that we have more context,
so I think one of the areas that are becoming a bit more mature is this retriever model, and be able to chat to documents or have a chatbot that is grounded in factual data. And so, the architecture where you have vector databases with embeddings of your documents, and you can retrieve that and then answer questions. I think that is something that can play into that thing, because now you can use a much larger document as context when you need to answer questions, rather than just retrieving a few snippets from your database that may have relevance to the question that has been asked. So like that retriever, we're building chatbots like those with a retriever architecture. And I think, interestingly, to add to that, you may want to interface to other data sources. That's not pure text. The tool augmented chatbots, you want to give it a whole schema of a database to help it query the database for relevant information, and then you can retrieve like nice factual data and chat about that. And not only things that are captured in a document, but you can ask sort of meta questions to this chatbot. I think it's going to really unlock a use cases in that area.
I agree that you know, to both points that you now made, that increasing the context size has a massive impact on the usability of these models, because it just opens up more use cases. Specific as the example, to have like an assistant that could read through multiple legal documents and sort of inform a decision on that. But on the other hand, I'm sort of disappointed that the best thing that we've been able to do with the transformer architecture is the brute force attack, make it bigger context size. And so far it's been working, right? It's
But we're hitting the limits, eh?
which seems like it, right? And I
Sam Altman said so. He's like, that's it. Like, we're not going any larger, are we?
one might ask, is that because they're afraid of the hype? or I mean, and another point, like, as we increase the size of these models, very little research has been done into what the environmental impact of that is. Training one of these models, yeah, it costs into the millions of dollars, but what carbon emissions are coming out of training these models? And for them not to release those models means everyone else that wants a model has to retrain them, and again emitting carbon.
It's a bit of an arms race, perhaps, and it's like Bitcoin all over.
So do you guys then think that instead of like, building beefier machines to actually go about building these models, should we rather not think of a new way of actually contextualizing our problem domain so that we can actually use it in a better, more efficient manner? Because clearly, scaling things and scaling infrastructure isn't the solution.
Well, it's interesting, but, these LLMs is like a hammer, and now we're trying to find problems we can solve with this hammer a lot of times. And so I'm always trying to think, how can I rephrase this problem so that an LLM can solve it? And it's not always probably the best way to go about things.
So isn't it just a matter of let's find the solution, find the problems that actually work well for LLMs rather than trying to retrofit all solutions to that? Because I think that's because of this whole hype cycle. That's at least what I'm seeing these days. Let's use a large language model to fix this problem just because
because it's AI.
And it's in the news, but there's still a lot of use cases where good old logistic regression will do the job. You don't need a transformer architecture to do all these things. But I think, yes, a myriad of new use cases are being unlocked because we do now know how to model sequential data in a really meaningful way. But not all data is sequential. And to try to force, force a square down a circle hole is not going to.
Still room for traditional sort of AI approaches.
So what are some like the real use cases that we could actually use for large language models? What are like the ideal states that you guys think would be the best ones?
I not just me, within synthesis, we enjoy the sort of analogy that you can use these large language models with, and it has sort of two components. There's a right brain component and a left brain component. Any problem that requires the right brain component as well, that tends to be the most.
Maybe just explain your left brain and right brain.
Right. Okay. So in the left brain component, this is where facts matter. It needs to be grounded in truth, right? Data is data is data. It's not, there's no different view to the data that changes the fact. But the right brain component shows the mathematician and the poet. They need to work in unison to produce something valuable, right? But in most machine learning or data cases, you just need the left brain. You just need data. 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. If you're in the use case where 1 + 1 can sometimes be 3, and you're looking for that niche use case, then it's a good idea to try and work on language, to use large language models. But then also, then comes in the data governance.
At the moment, it's very hard to actually get large language models into any sort of production, and it's cumbersome to work with unless you just use OpenAI's API on the one on Azure, for example. But after that, in generative AI in particular, it's still hard to work with. So, I think companies that can solve the problem of bringing it all together and making it easy for developers to create something new, is gonna be very popular. It's like a service like that.
Are you talking from an infrastructure perspective or from a data perspective?
I'm doing it from a developer experience perspective. In order to build something quicker and faster, no one is, because it's like the early days, it's like the cloud moment where, someone probably needs to come up with a solution to bring it all together, give you a platform where you can plug and play a few components. You want to generate images, you want to incorporate audio into it, so multimodal models that don't only accept text and video, but also audio, etc. And then you're coming into, I think, an era where all these modes come together and you can really do some interesting, solve some interesting problems.
Like majority of my struggles have been within the data collection. I think you've also had the same struggle as me. It's often been in the initial stage of it, right? And it's not a myth when they say 70% of an AI project is data. It genuinely is. And that's where majority of the struggle still lies with me. I don't know if you've experienced the same thing, but that's usually where majority of my struggle is. And I think, before going down the route of picking the best model to build a solution, first finding the right solution, finding the right problem for what you're trying to build out, and also choosing the correct data technique is also equally as important. What I mean by that is, do we need to centralize data? Do we need to distribute data? Do we need to, process data in such a way that we can actually have the end state much more easier? I think that's just my view in terms of it. If we can sort that part out first, then the rest becomes a lot more easier, at least.
Data, it always comes back to the data. Should we open up questions to the floor? Is there anyone with questions around, I don't know, operationalizing this one back there?
Yes, very interesting discussion. So you touched a bit on it, but yes, I would just like you to dwell a bit on it and really get your opinion. Have we hit the limit? I mean, if you listen to Sam, he says we don't have enough processing power. There's not enough GPUs to expand above what we have. We have Claude to, increase the context, but like you mentioned, it's not very elegant. It's brute force. So one of two things need to happen. We need to increase the processing capacity, get more GPUs, or the architectures need to become more efficient.
Yeah, totally correct. When we say we've hit the limits, I think it's two things. So size, yes, computational power that's needed. So it becomes very expensive and unwieldy to keep on training larger models and fine-tuning those. And secondly, just the nature of the fundamental architecture of the neural network. It won't get any smarter than it is currently without breakthroughs or fundamental changes to this architecture. I mean, it's essentially sort of a new architecture that gave us this ability, and we're exploring and exploiting everything it can do at the moment. But we're close to hitting the limits. And I think, OpenAI being sort of on that leading edge where they're pushing the envelope, that's what they found as well. And they're saying, well, we don't know where the next breakthrough is going to come from. We might be from them, might be somewhere else, but it's not going to lead to AGI.
I think just to add to that, the decoder-only stack of the transformer architecture that's used in the GPT models, it seems like we've reached the limit of what that can do. We can increase the size and get edge out slight percentages of more performance, but I think, the mechanism that brought us here was the attention mechanism. That's been scaled up to its potential now. New mechanisms need to be introduced. We've identified already with the models available today that, at least, from my readings, two components stand out that might, have potential for the next new mechanism. Firstly, moving away from tokenizers, having the model work on some other latent space than just having a mapping to
a symbolic space.
Exactly. Maybe. And then secondly, we've seen that the what's called the react paradigm, or the reasoning and then actioning paradigm, works quite well in improving the output from these models. So if you can somehow embed that mechanism into the architecture, I believe that's probably going to have a significant impact on the quality of the output from these models without having to fine-tune it or few-shot prompt engineer it or what. Just giving it the mechanism of self-reflection would probably have a massive impact.
I think we'll see incremental improvements still over the next few years, and bringing in other modalities like audio. We don't know much about the GPT-4 architecture, but what we could deduce and what they've said is that the multimodality of it also leads to enhanced capabilities. So bringing in the visual part of it led to greater performance. it's incremental. So bringing in audio might, improve it slightly more, but like there's a fundamental limit to how well it can scale, and it's not going to be the next more clever thing that it can actually, start thinking. We had a question in the front here, Joanna. Is there still time?
He said he always has a question.
We'll leave a mic with Zabir, I think.
Yeah.
That being said, do you think that the transform model is all that it's hailed to be? I'll give you some background. I read recently that there might be an alternative architecture which goes back to convolution and looking at something like the hyena filter. What is your guess or prediction on the next architecture that's going to take LLMs or machine learning to the next stage or step?
So, I mean, in terms of LLMs where the domain is language, I think attention works quite well because it mimics sort of what we do. For different modes of data, I can't really say. Convolutional, makes a lot of sense for images because, like two-dimensional space and like distance between objects matters quite a lot, right? For different modes of data, that's not really much my expertise, so I can't speak to that. But I don't think the transform architecture is a one-size-fits-all. That's never going to be the case for any kind of model.
What's your prediction on the next step of architecture? Anything that's catching your eye
For what mode of data?
for LLMs?
I think it's moving away from tokenizers. I think that should be, I'm hoping that's the next move because it seems kind of clumsy to have these two components to make a solution work, right? Having a completely separate pre-processing thing that translates language to numbers in such a rudimentary way.
Otherwise, other than that, I don't know an answer for you. What's the next big thing?
There are new things coming up though. So they are this is very new research though. So they are trying to bring in more reinforcement learning type techniques on top of this as well because of the amount of feedback that we're getting. So that is a potential new way of looking at this entire paradigm as well.
It might be because the whole adding the alignment step is what brought ChatGPT. It's what brought GPT-3 to ChatGPT is what is aligning the intelligence to what is expected by humans. So maybe it's not in the architecture, but in the way the model is trained, that's going to be the next breakthrough.
With that, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, and we'll be back in here in just under an hour for the next sessions. Thanks very much.